Let's have a conversation.
Let's.
So, I'm Ben. You've probably seen some of the videos I've posted on the channel. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And if you stumbled upon this video by happenstance, I apologize ahead of time. We're gonna have some fun. But I'm in the National Guard and I make videos about military service and some gaming. But because of the topic today, I wanted a little bit of backup, and so I've asked my buddy Zak here to come join in on the discussion. And so, Zak, tell us a little about yourself.
I've been in the National Guard almost as long as Ben. We were in the same unit together for a long time, old friends. I'm happy to be here and I'm excited and I'm looking forward to our civil discussion that we're having around a sensitive topic.
We've been asked questions about the Southwest border, what we think of it. And I was specifically asked by a good buddy of mine to make a video about it and kind of a couple questions that were had. And so I wanted to bring Zak in because Zak is a phenomenal brain that knows a lot about a lot of things. And we have really good discussions. So I thought it'd be really fun to just try to capture one of our discussions and talk about it and hopefully answer some questions, give our opinions, give some facts, and see where it goes.
Okay, I'm happy to do it. So what's our first talking point? Well, I guess we have to talk about, so like there's a border, right? And like Texas is a lot of that border or something.
Texas is a big part of it, and and it's in the news lately. There's some stuff going on down there.
Yeah. So Governor Abbott, he's been doing a whole bunch of stuff. He's been bussing migrants around. He's been doing all sorts of stuff. Most recent is throwing up razor wire on the border because his attitude is, hey, if the feds aren't going to do stuff, I'm going to do stuff. And so he sent, what was it, Texas Guard to set up razor wire.
Yeah, Texas National Guard. And that's an important clarification that we'll talk about.
See, and I'm just used to talking about National Guard, but there is nuance that we will have to cover later.
And if you've ever dealt with razor wire is just like concertina wire. It's meant to keep people and vehicles out of certain areas, and it's being employed on the border.
The Border Patrol, I'm just checking, and their gripe with it is it says that it prevents them from doing their job on the border, being able to go through certain places. It's dangerous to them. It's dangerous to people trying to cross, which I'm guessing Governor Abbott would say that's the point. But and so goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says that the Border Patrol, the federal Border Patrol, can remove razor wire, concertina wire set up by the Texas National Guard.
But it doesn't go so far as to say that the Texas National Guard or Texas as a state can't put more up after it has been cut.
So we're kind of at a impasse a little bit right now. A lot of people on the internet are saying, oh man, it's Southerners are getting uppity again. Other people are just like, this is nothing. A lot of people are saying respect federal authority. It's it's fun. But I guess our thoughts are more on like the idea of like, what's it like to be Joe down there? What's it like to, or what's kind of, there's an interesting kind of underlying tension between federal and state, right?
Yeah. And
National Guard lives in that, right?
Exactly. There's been a lot of questions about, is that legal? Can, Texas do that? Could the president come in and take over and federalize? Like it sounds like some governors or senators are asking for President Biden to do, is to nationalize the Texas, or to federalize the Texas National Guard. And can he really do that? So we've got some questions. We'll talk about that. But yeah, that would be a perfect time if we had a sponsor.
Back to our sponsor, America and its Constitution.
Should we give the background of like the National Guard? Just a brief background of National Guard.
Sure, we can talk about the National Guard. So if you go into National Guard armories or Guard headquarters or whatever, you often see there's this picture of a bunch of guys that look like dressed up like Spanish soldiers from, think like Conquistador era. They have like those big Marion helms on them and all that. And it's because that's when the National Guard considers that it was founded. If you ask the Devil Dogs, if you ask the Marines, they say they were the first branch and they met in a bar and all that. And as far as, I guess, branches of the military goes, I guess they're first, maybe. But the National Guard claims descendants from the old colonial militias from the earliest era of, settlement. The National Guard, as we know and understand it, was essentially a creation of the Militia Act in 1903. basically it was a Faustian bargain between the states and the feds. The feds went to the states and said, "Hey," because the militias were of varying quality, as one would
Yeah,
imagine.
sure.
And their idea was like, "Hey, we'll standardize this. They will be an auxiliary to the regular army. We'll train them, we'll equip them, we'll even pay them sometimes." And then the governors, they get to play with the guard in between. They can use them for disaster relief. You can use them law enforcement tool like during riots and such, as we've seen in the last couple of years.
Been there.
Yeah, been there, done that, and that's cool. But by so doing, we can federalize them anytime we want. They ultimately roll up under the commander in chief. And so when you and I both joined the National Guard, we swore an oath that was a little bit different than you do with your, say, with regular Army, regular Air Force. You swear to obey and defend the Constitution and the orders of the President of the United States and the governor of your state.
So yeah, there's some, I think, some misconceptions. I've had people at my civilian job ask me, and they're like, "Oh, you're in the National Guard, not the Army." And so to clarify that, it yes and no, right? The National Guard, I'm part of the Army National Guard, so we do all the same stuff. I'm actually a commissioned officer in the United States Army as well as in this, our state. So we play in both fields. We have a federal mission and a state mission. Our federal mission, we go fight wars, we go do all the things that the big army does, but then also, as Zach was saying, we obey the orders of our governor of our state, and they can call us up and put us on orders to go do things around the state as well.
And federalizing the National Guard isn't a weird thing. Every time the National Guard has been used overseas, they are put on federal orders. They flip completely over to a federal chain of command, and they go and do their thing, and then they come back. So this is a routine thing. The only thing that makes it weird is when it's done on American soil in defiance of a local leader versus the one sitting in Washington. So that's what makes it different.
Now, there's a little interesting nuance between there because we kind of have two commanders in chief, and there can't always be two. One has to, pardon the phrase, trump the other.
You're fired.
And that comes into play.
That should give you a hint. The president can nationalize guard units anytime by custom. Like, for instance, when they're going to call you up and send you overseas, the president by custom calls up governors and says, "Hey, basically, I'm going to take some of your guys in a little while." And then the governor says, "That's cool, blah, blah, blah." It's kind of a gentleman's thing. You shake hands. That gives him a chance to say, "Oh, snap, but I was really going to use him for this thing." I don't know what he would need to plan ahead for, but he could theoretically say that, and the president could go, "Oh, that's cool. I'll tap the state next to you," or whatever. But that's just a courtesy. He doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if there's ever conflicting opinions of where the National Guard unit should be used, when in doubt, the president of the United States wins that fight, and the governor is SOL.
Yeah, and you can tell when it says on your uniform, it doesn't say the state that you're a part of. It will say U.S. Army or U.S. Air Force. That's how it works. And this has been tested. You actually did some of the research here on if we want case study of when your governor says one thing and your president says another, what happens?
Yeah, well, I mean, there can be some conflict. So similar to what's going on in Texas, we've seen this play out in history before. This happened during the segregation times, and there's a prime example of this exact thing where the governor says no, and the president's saying yes, and the governor lost that battle. So if we look back into Alabama, it was 1963, the event Stand in the Schoolhouse Door. It is Governor George Wallace of Alabama didn't want integration to happen, so he went to the last university in Alabama and literally stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse to prevent some black students from completing their registration. And he wouldn't let them enter, and there was this whole scene. There's a bunch of cameras. And ultimately, the governor said no, no. The president said yes, yes. And the National Guard of Alabama was following the orders of the governor until President Kennedy federalized the Alabama National Guard, and the general of the Alabama National Guard had to get up, rendered a salute to the governor, and said, "Hey, gotta move." Here's that video.
Of State Police as Governor George Wallace appeals for calm
and prepares to confront a deputy U.S. attorney. The federal officers are armed with a proclamation from President Kennedy urging the governor to end his efforts to prevent 2 Negro students from registering at the university. The governor is adamant. He made a campaign promise to stand in the doorway himself to prevent the integration of the last all-white state university. After the federal officers leave, there's a lull of several hours while President Kennedy federalizes the Alabama National Guard and they move to the campus. Brigadier General Henry Graham arrives to tell the governor, "It's my sad duty to ask you to step aside on orders of the President of the United States." The governor yields to federal authority, but promises to continue what he terms a constitutional fight. There was no untoward incident at any time during this confrontation of state and federal authority.
So if the question is if the Texas State Guard is told by President Biden to do something, they legally have to do it.
Yeah. Now that will create a lot of turmoil, I would assume, within the units themselves, because, every soldier, whether we want to or not, has our internal beliefs, but we follow the lawful orders of those appointed above us, and it should all flow. But notwithstanding, it's got to kind of stink to be the guy, the political pawn's stuck in the middle of that. So in theory, Zach, we'll get to the questions in just a sec. So just go down this weird rabbit hole with me for just a second. So we know legally, yes, the president can federalize the state national guards, right?
Yes.
If he were to do that in Texas and he federalized just the ones on the border, in theory, the governor could activate more Texas National Guards to continue putting up razor wire.
I guess, yeah.
So in theory, and this is just a theory, Pat.
Hello, Internet.
Never mind. That's just a theory. So in theory, the president would have to federalize the entire Texas National Guard.
You would assume that he would just do the whole,
Right.
he would just do it all at once. It would just be a blanket thing.
Which would be crazy expensive, right? Because you have to pay not only their wages, you have to pay to house them, you have to pay to feed them, and it would be the entire Texas National Guard. That's a big bill.
Would he have to? Like he could just tell them, hey, you're all federalized and I'm not calling you up and you are to just remain doing what you're doing and there's no drill for the next 6 months.
But
you'll get paid.
But wouldn't that have to go on Title 10 orders? Can you put somebody on Title 10 orders and not pay them?
It sounds pretty illegal to me,
right? So we don't know all the ins and outs, but these are the questions that I would ask.
We're not your readiness NCO. I'm sorry.
No, but if the feds come down and say, "Hey, you're being activated on Title 10 orders, and you have to leave your employer," or even if you don't have to leave your employer, but you're now federally activated, that guarantees you certain extra protections and it guarantees you certain things when you go officially on orders.
Yeah, if you're in Title 10, you get TRICARE Prime, right?
Yep.
You're entitled to BAH, BAS.
Yep. So in theory, it could get really, really expensive. And if we continue down this weird little rabbit hole with me for just a bit longer, we'll get to the questions. What do you think would happen? So the whole Texas National Guard's now federalized. Texas kind of has something else in their back pocket that some other states actually do too. And it's I think it's a little odd.
And see, that makes sense to me because so Militia Act happens, right? And the states agree. They say, oh yeah, sure. We'll let our militias will now become part of, they'll be auxiliaries of the big military and they'll get trained up and have nice uniforms and blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot of states that were like, oh, but wait, I want my own state guard to play with, basically, to kind of recreate that militia. There's probably half a dozen states that have an active state guard that only answers to the governor, is really kind of resembles that old militia and has no allegiance or aside from the one that we all have as citizens of the United States, they don't have a direct line of authority to the president per se.
Yeah.
Most notably among them, of course, the Lone Star State, the great state of Texas.
And you can identify these state guardsmen versus the National Guardsmen by the patches. Zach mentioned earlier, as National Guardsmen, we wear U.S. Army on our chest. The state guardsmen will actually have something on their chest that says Texas State Guard.
Yeah, California, New York, whatever.
And on their shoulder, they don't wear Old Glory, they wear the state flag.
Which, again, in a way, it's kind of weird when you think about it, but I think from a historical context, that makes
pretty cool,
sense.
yeah.
There's a lot of that,
Yeah.
So it's neat that exists. Most states don't have that. They don't see a need for it.
No, and I think it's primarily used for like emergency situations, to help with flooding or cutting down trees and windstorms, things like that.
It's truly a break in case of emergency
Yeah.
kind of thing. Kind of what the Guard sort of used to be until it became a truly operational component of the military, which it is definitely that now.
So now that is separate from the National Guard. So the president would not have any legal footing to stand on to federalize Texas State Guard.
Yeah, it'd be like federalizing the Texas Rangers. It doesn't really make sense.
Okay, so I think we've set the groundwork pretty well for kind of what's going on and how the National Guard works and what is this State Guard thing. So let's hit these questions that were asked. There's 3 of them here that I was sent that a good buddy of mine wanted to know my opinion on, and I brought Zach, and so we'll talk about them. And again, this is just our opinions and our interpretations of what we know based on the facts that we have, and we're not representing anybody but Ben and Zach and our mamas. First question: do you believe the president has the authority to let all the people cross in over the border? Here, I think there's a duty to
Loaded questions. Let's start with those.
Yeah, loaded questions. So this is interesting. I think there's a duty to protect the sovereignty of the United States, and I don't know where it would be found that one could say yes, the president can just let in whomever, wherever. There's laws that we all have to abide by, and up to and including the president. So if it's lawful, sure, but if it's against established laws, I think the president probably also has to follow suit.
President, like Civics 101, right? President is not the creator of laws, he's the executor of laws. He's the one that carries them out. Having said that, accusing presidents of not enforcing laws or presidents themselves saying they will not enforce laws they find unjust or that they don't think make any sense is a old tradition. It's been around forever. So I would say that I bet you every single president that's ever lived or ever will live would say that border security is important and that sovereign nations have borders, and that's a thing.
Yeah. Question number 2. Does the governor have the right to protect the border against the wishes of the president?
Again, that's implying a president wants a state to have doesn't care about a state or its borders.
But I think in this case, if we just say, can Texas go in place razor wire? Dumb it down to that.
Can Texas do things to protect its borders? I mean, I think it does, and I think it always has. And that seems a governor doing what governors do. Yeah, I think that makes.
I would agree, and I would also say that I think the Supreme Court ruling kind of helps reassure that theory because it didn't say you can't put it back up. It stopped at saying it can be cut.
Yeah, the feds can cut through your stuff.
So it's just this perpetual cycle.
And
they can protect.
We can take wire suppliers are just rubbing their hands.
Oh yeah,
and stuff.
Invest now.
Yeah. You heard it here first. Yeah.
Third question here: is guarding the border an appropriate use of the National Guard? I like this question.
I think you have a different perspective than me. You can go for it.
So I think it can be, and I think the National Guard protecting our borders is an appropriate use of the National Guard. Now, my opinion is that the National Guard really should be focused on things here at home. Obviously, we'll back up the big army where it needs be, but I think our primary mission set should be focused on national defense here within the country as much as we possibly can be. So I think if there is a skirmish on our borders, I think absolutely that is an appropriate use of the National Guard.
Yeah, and I think that we were looking it up, but one of the very first most visible times, I don't know if we mentioned this before, that the National Guard was used after it was created at the beginning of the last century was for the Pancho Villa expedition along the border and across the border, actually. I understand, National Guard is in the name, right? Yeah. It's to defend the nation. But I think that, National Guard units were sent overseas in World War I and World War II. I think in Korea as well. It was only Vietnam when President Johnson refused to call it the National Guard that started changing, and that's when the National Guard actually got its stigma. That's when, I don't want to go to Vietnam, I guess I'll join the Natty Guard kind of thing, and it kind of got that bad name amongst the regulars.
Nasty girls.
Nasty girls, that's right. And that's only really been changing after, gosh, 20 years of GWAT, right? 2005, I think it was either half or over half of the army in Iraq was either guard or reserve by that time, just because the regulars have been just ground down after that. But so I think that I understand you want us to be used in defense of the homeland. And I agree with that. Like the fact that we had the NGRF mission, or the fact that we've both known a lot of people that have done straight up sandbags during flooding or whatever. Like that's cool stuff. And the fact that we get to have that kind of ownership in our own communities is super cool. I think though that we exist to be an operational reserve in reality, that we are there to basically be spun up and sent overseas the next time a thing flares up. That's pretty much what we're here for nowadays. And I think the military's come to rely on that.
I agree.
I don't think the regular military can truly be counted on to do everything it needs to do without expecting the National Guard and Reserves to back them up and backfill things or be there besides them.
And that would be my only quandary with that, is that I think we have kind of become the easy button. I mean, we're really good at what we do. Sorry, active duty guys. And to me, that's where the problem comes in, is if we are just the easy button that happens, I think the full-time guys should be beefed up, and there should be more money allotted to them to grow that and improve that organization, where it's not just, hey, we're tired, we need to cycle out, just call it the Natty Guard. Maybe that means that we just need to be a little bit more judicial about where we're deploying soldiers to, and not just always throwing soldiers because the National Guard's just there ready to go.
I actually kind of like the idea that the National Guard gets pulled on to the extent that it does, because we have an all volunteer force now, right? Used to be back in the day, Congress would declare war and people would get drafted, and that's how it works. And we don't have that anymore. We live in a better time, honestly.
Currently, right?
Currently,
yeah.
Cross those fingers, it's early in 2024, folks. Yeah.
Anything could happen.
Anything could happen, right? Last year we found out aliens are real. Nobody cares.
I need to see more proof, though. That's a whole nother topic.
Didn't they show off the paper mache alien?
Yeah, that was great.
And you're like, that's not it, guys.
Try harder, do better.
Yeah, do better, guys. Yeah, get better stuff. I kind of like that, just from a kind of a civic point of view, the fact that when something happens and all of a sudden all these people are disappearing. Your boss is gone. Your employee's like, sorry, I'm going to leave, or whatever. The guy that normally does this thing for you, or you employ for something, is just gone, because it makes it so that people are like, oh yeah, wait, there's a war or something. Otherwise it's completely disconnected from it. It's just you have this military janissary class who are just off to the side doing their thing. The military is more and more hereditary. It's more and more insular. The National Guard and the reserves make it so that people actually notice when there's something that happens. Sometimes it actually kind of connects it back, because if your neighbor's just gone all of a sudden,
it's true.
Normally a plumber, you're like, oh wait, yeah, there is a war going on.
That's a good point. I mean, this is why I love Zach, is because he brings up good points. I don't think that's enough to change my opinion, but I do think that's a really good way to look at it, rather than just from the soldier's perspective or the organizational perspective, but to the larger community perspective. I think that's a really good point.
I guess my hope is that this, if I'm just speaking as a citizen of the United States, the punchline to all this is that my hope is that this kind of kerfluffle conversation between ultimately Governor Abbott and other governors like him and the president is that it will spur greater talk about what we need to do to have a secure, sovereign border, and also to fix immigration.
But maybe what you're saying is maybe this will kind of bring it to a head.
I hope I
get some resolution.
I think that's the most optimistic point of view.
Yeah.
Is that this will be the thing, oh, we actually have to get a grip on this and we're going to make a change. And that's and the issue is being forced in a very public way.
Yeah. No, and I think that's good. And I think if we can push policy forward, actually make some change happen and get some good out of this, I think that's for the best. My, kind of closing thought on this would be the politics around it and the policies that hopefully can get change out of it are all good. I'm concerned for those individuals that, are assuming they can cross the border and then get turned away. And, my heart bleeds for them. But we got to figure out a better way to do it. And then also for the soldiers that are kind of caught in the middle of it, it's not fun to be, in the middle of that and just trying to follow orders, just trying to do the right thing. So, I think we gotta do better for those people that live in the state of Texas. We got to do better for those people that are trying to get here to America for a better life, or those terrible people that are trying to sneak in with them, as well as the soldiers that are there just trying to follow orders, do what they're told, and are getting floated around by the politicians.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that is one of the worst aspects of wearing the uniform, is knowing that you are, a lot of times you feel like you're a pawn. You're just you're there to just kind of be moved back and forth. But that's the price you pay for doing something as incredible as being, getting to wear the stars and stripes on your shoulders, right? It's just
The price you pay for a 10% Home Depot discount. Well, I think that addresses some of the questions that have been asked of us and maybe poses a bunch more. But I've appreciated the conversation, and hopefully it was beneficial and we got something out of it. You got something out of it. I always take away something from our conversation, Zach. So thank you for that. Always a good time.
always a good time, Ben. Thanks for having me. If you like hearing thoughtful takes on complex topics, including military, culture, and entertainment, feel free to like and subscribe to this video. White Monster is my credibility.
White Monsters worth it. At Knox, I feel like we should cheers to a good conversation.
To a good conversation.
Pretty.
I don't have a problem with caffeine. Caffeine has a problem with me.
I love my caffeine.
It can't stay away from me. It's the one that has a problem.
Exactly.